He runs trains on the high iron and in his basement. Coming up, you'll meet the locomotive engineer who's used his decades of experience on the railroad to inspire this miniature world. In fact, his work is so realistic, sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between his models and reality. We'll get a behind-the-scenes look at how he operates this railroad just like the real thing, and visit the line all this is loosely based on. All that and more is next. The man you're about to meet has been running full-size trains for more than 3 decades, but he's been a model railroader for even longer. Combine all that experience and knowledge and you get a realistic HO scale layout that looks and operates like the real thing.
Hi, my name is Tim Garland, and this is the Seaboard Central Model Railroad. This is a freelanced model railroad that's based around Gadsden, Alabama, set in the year of 2015. The layout is approximately 14 feet wide by 22 foot long in its current state, but there are plans for it to grow much larger. It'll probably triple in size eventually. Well, the Seaboard Central represents a fictional freelance railroad that exists between Birmingham, Alabama and Savannah, Georgia. And at first, my first layout was centered around Griffin, Georgia, and this one represents the western end of the line between Birmingham and Gadsden, Alabama.
Although Tim's layout is freelanced, there actually is a real railroad that runs between those cities. It's called the Alabama and Tennessee River Railway. The ATN took over operations from CSX in 2004. It currently operates the line from Birmingham to Guntersville, Alabama. And the railroad uses lots of second-hand electromotive division diesels. Here, you'll see ex-Burlington Northern, ex-Union Pacific, and other locomotives that have seen a lot of miles. As you watch this video, you'll see there are a lot of similarities between the ATN and the Seaboard Central. But even though there are many similarities, Tim's railroad is very much his own creation.
Well, the Seaboard Central, since it's being a freelance railroad, you can think of it more of like a what-if railroad. It's not real, there's no such thing as a real Seaboard Central. But it's in my version of what possibly could happen if we had a railroad that took over operations, former operations from ex-CSX and ex-Norfolk Southern trackage.
Tim came up with the idea for the Seaboard Central back in 1990, and he's been working on this iteration of it since early 2022. Like many modelers, Tim draws inspiration from various prototypes, but he also has decades of first-hand experience working on a real railroad.
Believe it or not, my first job out of high school, since I couldn't get hired on with the real railroads, was actually the engineer at Six Flags Over Georgia, running the steam train there.
He would go on to get a job with Norfolk Southern and eventually became a locomotive engineer back in 2000.
I always tell people that the work I do on the prototype is inspiration for what I do here on the model. I just call it research, so to speak. So I'm constantly observing nature or the way things look in real life, and I'm trying to recreate that in miniature.
Now, one thing you'll immediately notice is that this looks like a lived-in world. That's because nothing goes on this layout without a little or a lot of weathering. And he does all this himself and really enjoys it.
To me, model railroading is a version of 3D art. You're just expressing yourself. I look at it as this is the way I get enjoyment, sort of a stress relief, by just getting immersed in this, and you kind of put away with everything else that's going on in the world, and you're in your own little world.
The operations are also extremely realistic on the Seaboard Central. You're not just going to see trains running around in circles.
We're looking at this end of Gadsden Yard here, and in this scene you can see the different way I've done the tracks, and also little small scenes, like for example an old pile of cross ties where they've removed them, replaced them with new ones, and now I've got a guy sorting through them, which they'll more than likely end up using as landscape ties. On the backdrops are all photo backdrops, and they're just pretty much generic. But along the backdrop, that's supposed to be a Goodyear tire plant there, and so you can see the cars placed at that particular industry. Here, what I wanted to try to achieve is what you call color and texture. The texture of the rock. So for example, I'll use a larger style rock for the mainline trackage and a smaller style rock for the yard trackage, which is prototypical. The yards tend to be dirtier than the mainline because they don't get changed out as often. I also color the cross ties differently so they don't all look uniform. Some of the cross ties look a lot more aged and weathered. And you'll notice that all of the cars on the layout are also weathered. I don't put any freshly painted cars. They don't look like they're straight out of a box. They've got some kind of weathering. And since I modeled 2015, you'll see a lot of graffiti on the cars, which is unfortunate, but that's the way life is these days. This end of the yard shows the engine terminal. And one thing you do notice around real engine terminals is all the grease and oil that comes out of the bottom of those diesel locomotives. So I did want to show that. You may see the little sand piles here and there where they put sand in the locomotives that's used for traction. This right here, this represents where they would empty out the toilets in a locomotive. And for those that don't know, the toilets are located in the nose of the locomotive.
Look closely and you'll see all kinds of little details all over this layout. Here's a rack for the end-of-train devices. And this locomotive has a little cooler for the crew's drinks. Okay, moving away from the yard, Tim has built a large, double-track helix that allows trains to change elevation and travel to the other sections of the layout. Coming off the helix, you'll find a scrapyard, a scene Tim eventually is planning to relocate. Then, the tracks feed into scenes in Ragland, Alabama. Here, you'll find a cement company. And here's an old Seaboard Coastline depot that actually still exists in the real world. Next door, a small yard. But not every square inch of the layout is dedicated to trains.
This is an interesting scene right here in the corner. It represents like an old pond back in the woods. And I wanted to create what they call negative space. Not every space of your layout needs to be filled with tracks. You need to allow some room for what they call negative space, just to create an interesting scene. And I actually included some interesting little things, like you see the deer that are hiding back there, and there's even a Bigfoot, believe it or not, hiding in the woods if you can find him.
Now, Tim has put some personal touches into various aspects of his layout and the trains that run on it.
A lot of the Seaboard Central engines get inspiration from the Florida East Coast, and the Florida East Coast actually has a breast cancer awareness engine, and this one's actually for prostate cancer. And it's named for my father. My father's name on the side of the cab of that engine, and he's been battling prostate cancer since 2008, and it's a nasty disease that you wouldn't want on anybody to have. And I thought I'd dedicate this locomotive to him, and it's very special. And I'm glad to have it on the layout.
And finally, here's where the current iteration of this layout began.
So this scene right here is where I first started making this version of the Seaboard Central. This is just a fictional industry that doesn't exist in reality in Ragland, Alabama. This is an ADM ethanol facility where they convert corn into both ethanol fuel and distilled dried grains. And it was a great place to start the layout because it gave me a chance to reuse some of the bench work from my old layout and get something up and running pretty fast as far as trains go. And that way I could run a small train, have a little operations while I continued to build out the rest of the layout. So this is a remote control unit. You can tell by the flashing lights on the cab roof. and it's got a remote control operator out there on the front of the engine. There's actually two guys, both of them have what they call belt packs, and they can toss the engine back and forth to each other. And so there's no engineer in the cab. They're running it remotely. And this is really better for industrial operations like this.
So by now, you probably get the picture. This is a realistic operation. But the realism does not stop with what you see running down the tracks.
So I operate my trains with this throttle right here. It's what they call a proto throttle. It's made by a company called Iowa Scaled Engineering, and it's based off of a prototype control stand, what a real locomotive control stand looks like. So on a real locomotive, you have, this is called the reverser, and this determines the direction. So right there is in a neutral position, and you have forward and reverse. This is your throttle, which is the same thing as the gas pedal on a car. This is, it's idle, and it goes through notch number 8, and this is a brake. Now on a real locomotive, you have 2 or 3 brakes depending on the type of locomotive. On this throttle, we just have one, and this represents the brakes on the engine. So there it's applied, and there it's released. Here's your headlight switches for the front of the locomotive and the rear of the locomotive. You have a bell, and you have your horn. So to move the train, I just release the brake, move the reverser, and increase the throttle.
Alright, so Tim does not keep all this to himself. Several years ago, he started a YouTube channel dedicated to the Seaboard Central. There, he shares modeling techniques and gives layout updates. But my favorite part of his channel is the fact that he uses his miniature railroad to explain how the prototype operates. I've personally learned a lot by watching his videos. Now, the Seaboard Central is still expanding, and at this point, it's grown into something that has its own history and storyline.
What am I most proud of is actually not so much the layout, but the concept of the Seaboard Central being a plausible railroad. If you get to the point where people think it actually could really exist, then I think you've achieved that level of success that a lot of model railroaders aim to do.
Okay, so you may be wondering where the Seaboard Central gets its name. Well, it's from the fallen flag territories that it operates over, the seaboard coastline and the central of Georgia. Now, the Seaboard Central is operated with digital command control. This enables the models to actually look, sound, and run like real locomotives. And the wizard behind the DCC decoder installations in those engines is called Georgia Bigfoot Trains. You can find him here on YouTube at GA Bigfoot Trains. He does custom sound and LED installations and programming. Anyway, that's it for now. I hope you consider subscribing to the V12 Productions YouTube channel and also check out the Seaboard Central while you're at it. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.